I'd like them to think more about the litmus test, reading and understanding and believing what the Declaration of Independence actually says. Mencken said the dangerous man and man or woman to the government is one that has figured things out. Well, you have and you belong to a very dangerous group. And unfortunately, I'm afraid they're getting to know about that. But it's unique. You belong to a unique group, and you might feel frustrated at times because you say, well, we're not 51% of the population. And yet, the effort and the value of a group like we have that believe in liberty and understand is willing to work for it, it is like an army. Just ask Hillary Clinton how impressed she is with this army of people out there. You know, when she made that statement before the banking committee and praised how energetic the supporters of liberty were, the chairman, under his breath, I don't know if any of you heard that, under his breath he says, "You better keep it quiet. All you're going to do is encourage them." About foreign policy and civil liberties and economic policies, and I will continue to talk about it, but I was trying to figure ways of summarizing some of those issues. And I think the failure of our foreign policy, there are so many examples of what you can use, but one that I've used, and I think I even got to use it in one of the debates, and that is the conversation that Colonel Harry Summers had with Colonel Tu in 1974 as the Vietnam War was ending. They were getting together and dealing with prisoners and whatever. So in the discussion, our colonel was so bold because he just didn't want to go away thinking that we were, defeatable. So he said to the colonel, he said, you never defeated us on the battlefield. And Tu looked at him, he says, you're absolutely right. But it's also irrelevant. And that is our problem, I think, in our foreign policy, is the real truth is, by not knowing the truth, it's irrelevant to brag about how many bombs we can drop and how many people we can kill and how long we can occupy a country and on, and yet really it's not relevant when you think about what the real goals are supposed to be. After Vietnam, that the Vietnamese generals who then were communicating with American generals said, you never understood, and he was talking to the Americans, you never understood what the problem was with you because you thought it was a battle between democracy and communism. He said, but for us, it was always foreign occupation. And that is what energized their people. And that is why we're having trouble now with our foreign policy, with the continued threat and the continued draining, because our government has refused to accept the truth which is staring us in the face. And that is that we are being brought to our knees, not militarily, but financially, because we're not willing to say that the threat comes as a consequence of bad policy. And yes, they will have the moral high ground no matter what they believe in, what their religions are, because we're 6,000 miles from our shores and we're occupying their land, and we would react the same way with any other people. That many of you have heard, war is said to be the health of the state, and war is a racket. And I have come to that conclusion. It is very rare, at least in our history, where a war was absolutely necessary to defend this country. War has been used too carelessly, and it continues to be. And what were we promised in the last election? Some sympathy from some of our supporters, and even hope coming from me that with the new president we would have a different foreign policy, that a war would be ended. But what is happening? Does anybody really believe the war is going to end in Iraq? The war is continuing, unfortunately. The war is expanding in Afghanistan and spreading into Pakistan, but we continue to bleed both in real sense as well as the financial sense. Exactly what the Iranians and the Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, they all said, this is what we'll do. You know, just recently the Russians came along and they said, we're not going to oppose you anymore. If you want to haul weapons into Afghanistan, we're not going to resist you. You can fly over our territory and even drive over our territory. And I thought this was rather strange. Now, why would they want to do that? Because, you know, we're sort of in the face of the Russians as well. We've done to them what would have been equivalent to the Russians coming and putting missiles in Mexico, and I say, no, we don't care about that. But I got to wondering, what would be behind the Russians wanting to do that? I think maybe they just want to keep encouraging us, keep us on. They would like to laugh at us when we laughed at them when they got bogged down in Afghanistan. But you know, you'd think we'd have a memory. I mean, the Muslims have memories of thousands of years, but Americans in the military might, and our governments have a memory of about 3 weeks. So maybe that is the case. Unfortunately, being there is not much to our benefit. But you know, in the civil liberties issue, the privacy issue, one principle that we have accepted is the principle of prohibition. If we have prohibition of those things that we think are not good, that we can have moral behavior corrected by prohibitions and mandates, all of a sudden we're going to be a more moral nation and we're going to be a better nation. The whole thing is, it's just like foreign policy. The more we pretend we're protecting ourselves and building up national defense, the weaker we get. So the more we use this idea of moral imperialism on our own people, the more the problems are. Take the war on drugs. We have a war on drugs, well intended by most of those who push it. And they say, yeah, drugs are bad for you. But how about the war on drugs? Isn't that bad for all of us as well? Yeah. You know, when they decided to prohibit the use of alcohol, that was back in the really old days. That's actually when they talked about the Constitution. And they say, well, we can't ban alcohol. That's against the Constitution. Can you imagine this day and age of amending the Constitution to do some of the things they're doing? They wouldn't think about that. They amended the Constitution, didn't work, and then they repealed it. But now all this prohibition and interference. Just a couple weeks ago, we decided, cigarettes are bad for you too. I wonder how long it took them to figure that out. I mean, it must be just recent because for 100 years we were subsidizing tobacco. Now that we got all these people sick from tobacco because we were subsidizing and encouraging people to make a lot of money, now we have to say, oh no, we got to prove ourselves. So we're going to regulate cigarettes as if it's a drug. Well, I think cigarettes are horrible. I think they're very damaging to health. But I just don't think that's the role of government. And and what will it lead to? Already, federal and state taxes on smoking is very high. I understand underground economies have already started, black markets in tobacco products, but it's going to be a lot more. I mean, that's what will happen if they have all these rules and regulations and taxes. It will do nothing more than promote the black market and really not solve any problems. And because of the government, how long has they been putting it on a package as a danger to your health? You'd think, well, maybe that should have worked. Well, it didn't work, so they're going to the next step. But it's this principle that is so bad that we as the American people have accepted this notion that we should be tolerant of this federal nanny state. And I would say it's time to end this tolerance of the government telling us what to do every single minute of the day. Yeah!